G'day brothers and sisters. One of the themes which crops up time and time again in the Gospels has to do with authority. Where does Jesus get the authority to say and do the things which he does? We must remember that Jesus in his day was not just regarded as a normal rabbi or a normal teacher of the law. He was regarded as a teacher with authority. A teacher with authority was the cream of the crop. They were like the academic professors, the highest people in their field, like those heart specialists or those brain specialists who are the elite classification. They perform the surgeries which only they can perform, and the rest of the doctors look up to them. Jesus had this status. He was a rabbi with authority. This meant that Jesus not only could teach the Old Testament law, but he could bring about new interpretations. And the thing which supports or evidences Jesus' ability to have this level of authority is demonstrated through the miracles he performs. So we remember in the last episode we looked at the baptism of Jesus. And we remember at the baptism of Jesus, you had the Spirit descend on Jesus and the voice from heaven came. And this demonstrated to the people that Jesus was an elite rabbi with authority. But Jesus went above and beyond. He wasn't just a rabbi with authority, he was a rabbi with the very authority of God himself, because he is God. And the way Jesus demonstrated the legitimacy of his authority was through performing miracles. And Jesus performed a number of miracles in the Gospels which showed and demonstrated his authority to the crowds around him. Look at the way that he expelled demons. Nobody in the Old Testament had the power to do that. Jesus is the only one who demonstrated that authority. Look at the authority he showed to heal on the Sabbath. In today's episode, he heals a paralytic man and forgives him of his sins. It was his capacity and his authority, which came from the very throne room of God, which gave credence and credibility to the things he said and did. And today's episode, we encounter Jesus calling disciples, and we encounter Jesus performing supernatural healings. Let's read what the text says. It says, "One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret." That was just another way to refer to the Sea of Galilee. It says, "The people were crowding him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, 'Put out into deep water and let down the nets.' Simon answered him, 'Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets.'" So again, we have to remember, because Jesus was in this elite classification of rabbis, he was a celebrity in the ancient world. Everywhere he went from town to town, the crowds would have flocked to hear him teach. This is why as you read the gospel, you'll notice that there are occasions where when Jesus gets into a town, people invite him to their house. They invite him into the synagogue to teach. It was because of the level of authority he had. When a teacher with this level of authority came to town, everybody would flock to see him. And we add to this the fact that Jesus was doing miracles and the reports would have gone from village to village. Jesus would have been in huge demand and the crowds would have flocked to him. And that's what happens in this episode. The crowds are flocking to hear Jesus teach. And it is here that we experience Jesus calling the Apostle Peter to follow after him. Now again, this sounds strange to us, but in the ancient world, only the best of the best could be students. Only those with the highest aptitude level could become students of a famous rabbi. And it was very rare that a rabbi would actually call somebody to follow him. No, most of the time you would have to come to the rabbi and state your case, and he would dismiss most of the people, but he would only allow the best of the best to follow him. So you have to imagine that here we have Jesus, this world-renowned teacher, this world-renowned rabbi calling you. Well, if a rabbi of that authority called you in the ancient world, you would follow. And that's the calling of true discipleship, to recognize the status of who Jesus is as an authority figure, as the greatest authority figure. And the fact that he calls you and I to follow him is powerful. We have to respond. You must respond to the calling of Jesus. Peter would have been foolish if he had have rejected this calling that Jesus put on his life. And as Jesus is teaching the crowds, he asks Peter to set out a bit more, to go into the deepest parts of the water, to keep fishing. Now, most fishermen fished during the early hours of the morning. They would sort of start fishing around the usual times where you and I are sleeping. Around 4 a.m. they would set out and start fishing. Why? Because the winds were at their most stablest at that time, and the conditions were more optimal for fishing at this time of the day. So you can imagine Peter and some of his colleagues have been fishing all night. They bring their boats to shore and they're tidying up their nets, and then Jesus hops into their boat and starts teaching the crowds. And then he says to Peter, I want us to go back and continue fishing. Well, you can just imagine Peter, his answer is, well, I've been fishing all night. I kind of know what I'm doing, Jesus. You might be an expert in the law, but I'm an expert when it comes to fishing. But still, Peter agrees. He agrees and he goes out. And it's at this point that it says, but because you say so, I will let down my nets. And it says, when he had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. So you can just imagine how this scene plays out. Peter and his colleagues have been fishing hard all night. They've had very little success. They come to shore, they start tending to their nets, hoping to sell whatever minimal catch they've had in the marketplace for that day. It is at this point that Jesus sends them back out to try fishing again. And when they let down their nets, there is a miracle which Jesus performs. Why? Because he has authority over creation itself. And when they let down their nets, their catch is so vast that this communicates to Peter something about the power of who Jesus is. And Jesus uses this miraculous catch as an illustration for Peter. He says, you have been fishing for fish for your whole life. Now you're going to start fishing for people. Let's read what it says. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." At this particular point in the narrative, this is not Peter's first interaction with Jesus. Sometimes we can have the false opinion or the false idea that Jesus just randomly went up to Peter and John and James one day and said, "Hey, you guys follow me." No, by this stage, by the stage of Jesus calling these apostles to follow him, they had met with him on a couple of occasions, and they had heard some of his teachings, and they'd even seen some of his miracles. This was probably one of the major things that led them to want to follow Jesus. They had been drawn in by his teachings and drawn in by the miracles that they had seen. So when Jesus calls, Peter and the other apostles follow. But I want to point out something really interesting about this text. I want you to notice Peter's response at this point. When the miraculous catch happens, Peter responds by falling on his knees and saying, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinner." This is a very deep response that Peter gives. You know, Peter was a mixed individual. There are times he seems to get it. There are other times he seems to go backwards in his faith until eventually after the resurrection, he gets it right. Later on in the story, Peter will make a bold confession as to who Jesus is. But even early on, we start to see Peter really get glimpses as to who Jesus is. And this is one example of this. The way Peter responds is very similar to the way the prophet Isaiah responds in Isaiah chapter 6. In that particular episode, Isaiah has a vision of the Lord, and he sees the edge of the Lord's garment, and he hears these angels proclaiming, "Holy, holy, holy." And the prophet Isaiah is fearful. He's fearful because he knows he, as a sinful man, is standing in the presence of God, and he's worried for his life. And he says, "Woe to me, for I am a man of unclean lips." This is very similar to Peter's response. He says, "Get away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Even in these early stages, Peter gets a glimpse into who Jesus is. He doesn't fully understand what he's saying. He doesn't fully process it. But even in these early stages, Peter understood that Jesus was more than just a rabbi with authority. He was the Lord himself. And the very fact that Jesus had demonstrated his power over creation in such a way gave Peter a glimpse into who Jesus is. And that's true for you and I, brothers and sisters. There are many people out there, they have a glimpse, they have an idea of who Jesus is. They see him as a great teacher. They even see him as a great miracle worker. But not everybody goes to the next step of actually declaring the lordship of God. And that's what separates a true disciple from somebody who just regards Jesus as a great teacher. They recognize the authority of Jesus as the Creator and as God in the flesh. There's a lot more I wish I could say about today's reading. The passage of Jesus healing the paralyzed man is a fantastic passage. That's another example of Jesus demonstrating his authority in an area that only God has the capacity to demonstrate. But we'll leave it there for now. God bless you, brothers and sisters, and we'll see you next time.